Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. In this video I'm going to be doing a tier list for the leaders that we have available in set 3. I meant to do this before the set came out, but now I'm kind of glad that I didn't because we have restrictions now. The 9-drop Edward Newgate, the Radical Beam, and the Blocker Marco are now restricted to 1, so I figured now is a good time with regionals coming up to finally get around to doing a tier list. And a little bit has changed since the restrictions, but I've been having a lot of fun testing out the new format, and let's just jump into the tiers. So we have the best deck. This is going to be what I consider the best deck. We have top tier, we have serious threat, and unlikely to top. So just to quickly explain why I chose these. I think all the decks in these 4 categories are relevant. This is a new kind of unexplored. This was a kind of a last minute restrictions. I know it was only 3 cards, but it does shake up things a bit, and a lot is still up in the air. So we're going to start off with what I consider the best deck, and that's Zoro. And the reason why I think Zoro is still the best deck is because it didn't get hit too hard by the restrictions, but the other red decks that are relevant did get hit a little bit harder by the restrictions. So I think all the red players are just going to kind of funnel towards Zoro. And I also think that Zoro's worst matchup is 50-50. Because it's just such a consistent deck. It can throw multiple bodies at you. It has removal ability, and it has a decent amount of power. So yeah, I just think that red is still the best color, and everyone will be playing Zoro now. Not everybody, but a good majority, for all the reasons that I explained. In top tier, I'm going to first put Trafalgar Law. Now, Trafalgar Law, it's another consistent deck, a lot like Zoro, and I think that it will be top tier because of its good yellow matchup, because it does put out quite a few blockers, and yellow kind of has trouble dealing with small blockers and just blockers in general. So it has a really good matchup into the yellow decks, but it does not like Fire Fist, I will say that. And there are a few other cards that remove, maybe like black. It doesn't really enjoy going against black too much, but the consistency of Law is just too good. It's always going to be a good leader, and I definitely think that it will be top tier just for its favorable yellow matchup alone. And speaking of yellow, I think that the best yellow deck, and definitely the most heavily represented, is Katakuri, and he does belong in the top tier in my opinion. So Katakuri is the more aggressive option for yellow leaders, and I do think that it could definitely go toe-to-toe with Zoro. And if Katakuri sees triggers, really crazy triggers, then it's beating pretty much anything at that point. And of course, I have to mention the 10-drop Charlotte Linlin is definitely, in my opinion, the best boss monster that we have now. So having access to that card and being able to just overwhelm your opponent if you're seeing all your triggers, I think that yellow is definitely a good deck. And this is it here for my top tier. We kind of have a Pokemon thing going with the starters. So Zoro beats Law, Law beats Katakuri, Katakuri, can stand up to Zoro. So we kind of got that going on. But these, in my opinion, are the best decks, the most heavily represented decks, and the most consistent decks. So now moving into the serious threat category, my first deck that I'm going to put, and I will be putting these in order of what I believe are the best decks. So first up is Rob Lucci. Now, I admittedly do not have much experience with Rob Lucci, but it has the results to back it up. I've seen a lot of tournaments recently where it's either won or topped. So it has that going for it. It of course has the blockers that cannot be KO'd by effects, which is really strong. And yeah, Lucci, it's a really powerful deck, I think, and it has the ability to put out a pretty decent board, and then you can use Lucci to close out. It could possibly make its way up into top tier, but one drawback I see with the black color in general is I feel like you always have to be on top of your game. You have to play perfect in order to compete with the top tier decks. That's just how I feel, because you have to make decisions like managing your hand, and the best black cards too don't have counter, so you always have to make decisions on counter, and I feel like sometimes it's just out of your control if you're just not seeing counter or not seeing your removal pieces. So yeah, Lucci, definitely very strong, and I personally prefer Smoker, but I'll go over that later. But as of right now, Lucci seems to be the go-to black leader, so I have to put him ahead of Smoker. The next deck actually that I'm going to put up is Charlotte Linland. So this is the alternate option for yellow leaders, and this is from the starter deck, and I do think that it's a powerful leader. Unlike Katakuri, you have more interaction with your life, I feel like, because you can manipulate your triggers with her ability. But I do think, personally, I would still play Katakuri just because I think that the pressure that he puts on with his ability, being able to throw out bigger swings like 7k swings, I just think that that pressure is necessary. But definitely I've seen a big uptick in people playing the Charlotte Linland, so it's definitely a leader that gives you a lot more options, especially in the end game. I think, you know, you got Soul Pocus and Ikaku Sovereignty and Brule. You can just make a lot more plays off life toward the end to kind of keep you alive. And I guess the big thing is you are able to do that, and then you still have your 10-drop Charlotte Linland to close out the game. So maybe the power from Katakuri isn't needed as much if you play in that way. But you know, another option that I see in Charlotte Linland is the Rush Katakuri. So you have that as an option as well to kind of put on a little bit more pressure that you are missing from Katakuri. But both yellow leaders are really good. Just having access to the 10-drop Charlotte Linland is amazing. And really, I don't think the leaders are too far off. I just think that it's more of just seeing less representation with the Charlotte Linland right now. But yeah, moving on. This deck is actually surprising me lately, and it's Magellan. I do think that Magellan is a serious threat. There's been a few tournaments recently where I've seen Magellan top, and you know, I wanted to try it out for myself, and when I did, I was like, wow, this is definitely a really good deck. So what makes Magellan good? First off, you can ruin the curve for yellow by dropping the character Magellan to make them Negadon, and that prevents them possibly from playing their big boss monsters a turn sooner. So that's huge, but also with so much removal in the format, there's a lot of bodies here that you get effects off of thanks to Magellan being an impel down leader. So there's cards that give you extra Dawn to ramp, and there's the Magellan character that gives your opponent -2 Dawn if he's removed from the field. So I do think that that's pretty strong. And then you also have access to both the 6-drop and the 7-drop king to kind of take on Zoro and Law's smaller bodies. So I do think that Magellan's really good. And also with the small body format, Hell's Judgment takes away 2 swings. So that's another thing that Magellan has going for it. So I'm really impressed so far playing Magellan, and I think it's really strong. I do think it's a serious threat. And we'll go with Smoker next. Now, I did say that I prefer Smoker to Lucci myself, and that's just because I think that he has more synergy with the Navy package. So his ability also puts on a lot of pressure. There's so many one costs in the format that I think you're going to be swinging 7k with Smoker often, and his ability also just has some synergy with some of your removal cards. So that's kind of the way that I lean is Smoker, but you know, he has the same problems as Lucci and he has the same benefits as Lucci. Both of the decks do play a lot differently in a lot of ways, but the main cards that make them both good, like the removal and the blockers, still apply. Now, Lucci, I think board presence is the bigger thing with Lucci, since you're just dropping bodies with Smoker, whereas with Lucci, you can get characters with Bluno and Air Door and cards like that. So yeah, but Smoker definitely still a serious threat in my opinion. And I initially was going to end it at those four for the serious threats, but after some more playtesting, there was a deck that was kind of on the fringe, and I think that my recent playtesting just puts it in this category as well, and that is going to be Eustace Kid. And I'll just lump both together. The control version, if you haven't tested the control version that we mostly saw in set 2 into yellow, you should give it a try because it's almost free. I'll say, like, that is a really bad matchup for yellow. The control kid, playing 8 drops, playing small blockers. You don't need to play 8 drop, but if you do and they don't category it, it's just such a free matchup. But the more common build is the Film Kid, and it's really good right now too to swarm the board, and you still have access to some blockers, and you can add Krieg in there to get rid of 2 bodies on board. So yeah, Film Kid is definitely a threat, and that leader ability is still amazing. So I do think that Eustace Kid is a serious threat. You're also able to tap down some blockers, so maybe it has a better matchup into black. And yeah, it's definitely still a deck that I think is good. Moving on, we're going to get into the threats now. So these are still good decks. I know it's, you know, being 4 tiers down, these are still decks that I think can top for sure. The first one I'll kind of talk about both at the same time. Crocodile and Doflamingo, I think, are at the top of the threats. So what puts these a little bit behind? I would say red gives it problems, especially with Fire Fist removing the blockers and their swarm of bodies and still being able to swing out is a problem. And then, you know, you'll still have your problem against green, but I do think that blue can kind of shine against black and sometimes yellow. It depends. Yellow still struggles against small blockers and blue has plenty of those, but in my experience those are kind of closer to 50-50. But Crocodile, typically I've seen it played with the Pacifista Centimaro engine, and swarming board like that can be pretty overwhelming, and it's definitely strong. Doflamingo is actually something I don't think is fully explored yet. I haven't seen it too much in set 3, but just thinking about it, you know, you still have Mihawk. Now you have 3,000 worlds to completely get rid of things. And then you have the promo Jinbei from Treasure Cup to also get rid of small bodies. So having access to those 3 to bottom deck some bodies, I think can be strong. And then you're being aggressive with leader, constantly putting pressure by playing characters onto the board. And then you're playing blockers. Like, I could definitely see Dofi moving up into serious threat, possibly even top tier. Like, it has that kind of potential. I just don't think that people are back on board with Doflamingo just yet. But I do see red possibly keeping it down, and of course Law has always been kind of a bad matchup for Doflamingo as well. But maybe 3000 Worlds was the missing card for, you know, bot decking those blocker laws or something. But Doflamingo and Crocodile are definitely threats and can top. So the next one I'm going to talk about, it got hit pretty hard with the restrictions, but it's still a really good deck, I think. You could possibly still run the Whitebeard engine, but the Straw Hat engine for sure is tried and true, and you don't miss too much. So I definitely think that Edward Newgate is a deck that will come back around. It's still going to be pretty consistent. You do lose a little bit of the defense that you needed to prevent your opponent from taking that last life, but it's definitely a deck that is strong for sure. Moving on, another deck that I think is pretty good still, even though it also was affected by the restrictions, is Ace. And I do think that Ace is pretty decent still, because I could see it still being good into Zoro and Law. And, you know, with those being two top tier decks, I think that Ace will always have a place in the meta. But the yellow matchup is a little bit rougher, and I could see the black matchups being a little bit tough if they set up bodies that you can't remove. It's definitely a powerful deck still. I don't think that it'll ever reach its potential with the restrictions, but it's definitely a deck that can top a tournament still. Moving on, let's see. We have actually Arlong. I think that Arlong is actually a little bit slept on. I think I heard that it topped a tournament recently, and I played against it, and those triggers get pretty serious. They're pretty good at stacking the board, and yeah, Arlong, it's a fun deck. I haven't tried it out too much myself, but I have played against it, and with it seeing results, I can definitely see it being a threat. What else do we have here? Nami. I think that Nami's a threat for sure. Have people really figured it out? I'm not sure if it can really improve upon what it already is, but it's just one of those decks that plays completely differently. You know, you're milling your own deck in order to win the game, and you can catch anyone off guard with that. So I definitely think that Nami is a threat. Here's one for sure, the black and yellow Charlotte Linlin. So another deck that I haven't experienced too much of, either playing against it or playing it, but the limited exposure I do have, you know, it has access to blockers that can't be KO'd by effects, but it also has an ability where if it hides behind those blockers and your opponent's not really swinging too much, then this deck can just stick around, and then once it starts building up bodies, that's where it shines, because it can regenerate its life, whereas your opponent can't. So yeah, it's another deck that I think is a little underexplored right now, but with the low life that it starts out at 4 life, it just might be too slow for a meta that's going to see a lot of Zoro and a lot of Law. But definitely a deck that I think is strong, so I do consider it a threat. Another deck that I actually really like right now is Luffy. I think that Luffy, being Dawn efficient, it can do a lot of what Zoro can do, but I'm not sure too much what it does better than Zoro at this point. Definitely in set 2, I think it was better at the removal, but now with Zoro having access to like Fire Fist, I think that it's just as good. But yeah, Luffy I still think is a strong leader. I think that you could definitely play a few different cards than Zoro can play. And maybe you go with the Straw Hat Rush cards to kind of differentiate there in order to make up for the overall power that you lose out with Zoro, because, you know, he gives 1,000 to each of your characters in play. Whereas Luffy, you can only attach Arrested Dawn. So you're going to play a little bit bigger bodies and probably rush attackers that can already swing out. But the removal's still going to be there. Red's still good. Luffy's still good. So I think there are a few more decks that I would consider threats. One of them would be Kazuki Odin. It's kind of a strange leader. This has been true since set 1. But Odin can actually play the 8-drop Eustace Kid better than Eustace Kid can, thanks to its ability. You can actually set up an 8-drop Kid and then pitch a Wano card and bring 2-dong active. So if you're able to do that, then you're able to play counter events to protect Kid right off the bat, or you can play down blockers. So Odin is definitely interesting, and it has a lot of options. I think with its ability, you can kind of flood the board a little bit more. So there's that, and also having access to all that tap down. Yeah, I think that Odin is a threat. I think that it's going to be very, very lowly represented for sure. But it can definitely top a tournament though. We've already seen it. So yeah, not too bad. So I'm tempted to put a few more decks in the threats, but I think I'm going to just leave it at that. Just want to look through again. Yeah, so there's 2 other decks I would consider as threats, but there's one deck in particular that I was excited about, but then I tested into it. I'm like, Fire Fist really crushes this strategy. It's still a fun deck, but and that would be Kuro. It's strong, it can catch people off guard at times, but I just don't think that it's as threatening as these. Another one would be Kaido. You know, Kaido is always going to be there. You see Island, you see your Kings to get rid of bodies. Honestly, it is a threat, right? But I just don't see people going back to Kaido. So it's going to see very low representation. But yeah. And then, yep. That's 2 decks worth mentioning that could possibly be threats, but I'm going to put them in this category instead. And then we just load up the rest down here in unlikely to top in no particular order. I guess, you know, Sanji we can move up here. Actually, I think Ivankov isn't too bad too. If this turns into like a small body format where decks focus on small removal, then I can see Ivankov getting up there. But yeah, the rest just go here. We don't even have these yet, so just gonna leave them off the list. But that is my tier list for OP03 post restrictions, and this is to maybe help people prepare for regionals. I've been playtesting a lot, and this is just how I see it right now. This is, you know, of course, my opinion. So if your deck is at the bottom, then, you know, don't be discouraged. You know, stick with it, and you never know. Could prove me wrong for sure. And also, like I said, the top 4 categories here, I think, are all decks that can top, for sure. I just think that these are very heavily represented, really consistent, really strong. These decks, I think, can challenge these. And these decks are just decks that you don't want to take lightly because they are definitely capable of topping. So that is my tier list. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. If you guys have been playtesting in preparation for regionals or just for your locals, like maybe you have results at locals that you could shed some light on some of these decks. But yeah, that's all I have for this one. Give this video a like if you enjoyed it, and consider subscribing for more One Piece card game content, and I'll see you on the next video.